So, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure and no little honour to be able to introduce our honoured guest speaker. I must thank our co-founders, Hannah and Preeti from King's College, Cambridge, who helped arrange this. Professor Stephen Hawking is one of those rare people who is actually, probably needs no introduction. He's probably one of the most brilliant people alive on the planet. He and I, of course, have a lot in common, which I hope Professor Hawking can hear. We both went to Oxbridge aged 17, rather young. We both ended up taking up rowing and coxing in particular. We both ended up at Trinity Hall. Thereafter, his career has been a relentless intellectual rise, and mine has not, but it started well. We're very privileged to have such a distinguished scientist, thinker and physicist who sadly has had his own very complicated health journey that many of you will know about. He's very kindly agreed to speak to us about his experiences as a patient. I'd like you to give a really warm welcome to Professor Stephen Hawking, Companion of Honour.
Can you hear? I would like to thank the Global Tracheostomy Collaborative for inviting me to talk today at their UK launch. I thought I would tell you a bit about how my tracheostomy came about. In my third year at Oxford, I noticed that I seemed to be getting clumsier, and I fell over once or twice for no apparent reason. But it was not until I was at Cambridge, in the following year, that my mother noticed, and took me to the family doctor. He referred me to a specialist, and shortly after my 21st birthday I went into hospital for tests. I was in for 2 weeks, during which I had a wide variety of tests. They took a muscle sample from my arm, stuck electrodes into me, injected some radio-opaque fluid into my spine, and watched it going up and down with X-rays as they tilted the bed. After all that, they didn't tell me what I had, except that it was not multiple sclerosis, and that I was in a typical case. I gathered, however, that they expected it to continue to get worse, and that there was nothing they could do, except give me vitamins. I could see that they didn't expect them to have much effect. I didn't feel like asking for more details, because they were obviously bad. I learned years later that I had motor neuron disease, or ALS. The disease progressed rapidly at first, but then slowed down, and I lived through the 60s and 70s with increasing disability. In the early 80s I continued to get worse, and had prolonged choking fits because my larynx was weakened and was allowing food to get into my lungs, until eventually I caught pneumonia in 1985 on a trip to CERN, European Center for Nuclear Research. I was rushed to the Cantonal Hospital and put on a ventilator. The doctor said the hospital thought I was so far gone that they offered to turn off the ventilator and end my life, but Jane refused and had me flown back by air ambulance to a Denbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge. The doctors there tried hard to get me back to how I had been before, but because my larynx was allowing food and saliva into my lungs, in the end they had to perform a tracheostomy operation. Before my operation, my speech had been getting more slurred, so that only people who knew me well could understand me. But at least I could communicate. I wrote scientific papers by dictating to a secretary, and I gave seminars through an interpreter, who repeated my words more clearly. However, the tracheostomy removed my ability to speak altogether. For a time, the only way I could communicate was to spell out words, letter by raising my eyebrows when someone pointed to the right letter on the spelling card. It is pretty difficult to carry on a conversation like that, let alone write a scientific paper. However, a computer expert in California named Wald Wolters heard of my plight. He sent me a computer program he had written called Equalizer. This allowed me to select words from a series of menus on the screen by pressing a switch in my hand. I now use another of his programs called Words Plus, which I control by a small sensor on my glasses, which responds to my cheek movement. When I have built up what I want to say, I can send it to a speech synthesizer. After the tracheostomy operation, I had a plastic tracheostomy tube in my trachea, which prevented food and saliva from getting into my lungs. Over the years, the pressure in the cuff damaged my trachea and made me cough and choke. My wife, Elaine, and I met David Howard, an ENT surgeon, at an altitude of 30,000 feet above sea level, not far from Greece. He was on the same flight as we were in 1998, and we had attended separate conferences in Greece. David introduced himself to us during that flight, having watched the way in which I was struggling to eat and to breathe at the same time. It didn't work very well. After speaking with us during the flight, David told us that he could probably solve the problem for me, because he was a surgeon in London that specialized in reconstructive growth surgery. We exchanged contact details, and I began to consider David's offer. Once back in Cambridge, we were still coping with my weight loss. At the time I weighed a mere 6 stone, with almost continuous chest infections, which were a drain on my general health. The most unpleasant thing for me was that I had to cough up a lot of the food that slipped into my lungs during each meal. After a few weeks we decided to invite David to our home in order to explain what his help would involve. David admitted that the odds of me surviving the reconstructive throat surgery were slim, but then we also knew that my odds of enjoying life or surviving for much longer were also minimal. I was admitted to the old Victorian hospital, the Royal National Throat, Nose, a near hospital in Gray's Inn Road, London on 4th May 1999, as my larynx by this point had no useful function remaining. Contrary to popular belief, the most important function of the larynx is not voice, which I had already lost, but it protects your lungs by closing off the airway every time you swallow anything. The tracheostomy that Roger Gray did in Cambridge many years before had done a great job, but the years of having the plastic cuff blown up inside my trachea meant that it had almost eroded through into my esophagus. The wall between the two tubes was paper thin and comprised a life-threatening situation. I was also in imminent danger of another life-terminating event, bronchopneumonia, especially as my weight was so low with malnutrition. The risks of the surgery were overwhelmingly outweighed by the risks of no surgery. I was discharged home with Elaine and the team on 20th of May 1999, 15 years ago. Thanks to David, my laryngectomy made my lungs much safer and my work of breathing easier. After my laryngectomy, I was able to breathe on my own for a further 5 years. However, in 2004, my oxygen saturation began to fall at night, and I went on to nighttime ventilation. For the last 3 years, I have been on full-time ventilation, but this has not prevented me from leading a full and active life. At the age of 72, I still have a full-time job as Director of Research at the Center for Theoretical Cosmology at Cambridge. I have an IP3 Plus ventilator on the back of my wheelchair. Thank you for listening.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of everybody in the room, I want to thank Professor Hawking. His giant intellect is matched only by his bravery, and we all greatly appreciate the effort and the words he has shared with us. Thank you very much indeed, sir.